Greetings duelists and welcome to another video. So as many people already know, Duelist Nexus has already been revealed. The set is coming out on the 28th of this month, so basically in a couple weeks now. Um, One of the archetypes that's going to receive support is a set that is from Amazing Defenders, and it came out alongside Purely and Mikanko, and that archetype is Rescue Ace. It's very important to talk about this archetype and talk about like the changes that is going to come with this archetype, because if you look at Mikanko and you look at Purely, they've both been successful in the TCG to some extent, but not Rescue Ace. The main reason for that is because the Mikanko strategy is very splashable. There are a lot of toolbox options that deck has, and that deck is really good at going second. And I don't think I need to talk about Purely. I think a lot of people already know that Purely is a really good deck right now, and post Duelist Nexus, that deck is just going to be going to be even stronger. Is going to be pretty much at the level of Kashtira. It might even contest it to be the best deck. Um, but Rescue Ace is going to receive some cards in that set that is going to skyrocket its playability. It's going to make the deck a lot more viable. It's going to give them a lot more play starters. It gives them a very coherent win condition, and overall it makes the deck very consistent. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to talk about what do Rescue Ace have at the moment, what is their win condition at the moment, how does Duelist Nexus change that strategy for them, and the proper ratios you need to take into consideration when playing this archetype. So without further ado, let's begin. So the Rescue Ace archetype consists of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 different monsters. They're scattered between machines and warriors. The warriors being like tutors for the machine monsters, and the machine monsters being tutors either for the warriors or for other forms of utility. So the most important card in the deck is the Hydrant. Hydrant is an outlier to what I just mentioned, because the Hydrant not only does it make it so you can search for any other name in the deck, but it's also a playmaker for a lot of the cards, because we do have spell and traps and monsters that do rely on the Fire Hydrant to just have more beneficial effects. So with that being said, this card is a definite 3 of. So like we're just going to put this aside and we're just going to like start mounting the deck. Airlifter, it's a spell searcher. The Monitor is a trap searcher. The Fire Engine summons a monster, Rescue Ace monster, if your opponent summons a monster. The Fire Attacker makes it so you draw 2 cards if you're and discard 1 card if your opponent adds a card. The Turbulence sets up to 4 of your of your quick play spells and your traps from your deck. And the Impulse can target a monster and freeze its effects for the turn if you successfully resolve it. That's a TLDR of what the monsters do. Now I'll go more in depth of what the cards do individually. Besides the freezing effect, the Impulse makes it so if your opponent activates a monster on the board, you can tribute it from the field or your hand and summon a Rescue Ace machine monster from your deck. So Impulse by default will summon you either the Hydrant or the Turbulence or the Fire Attacker or the Engine. I think by that merit alone, this card is really strong. You can do this on your opponent's turn, like literally when they're starting their turn, and that makes it so you start like applying pressure to your opponent because you're summoning monsters on the board that can do something in the next turn. Like impulse summoning a fire attacker could be really cool because if your opponent activates any monster that can add a card, just to name a few, you have Kashtira Unicorn, Fenrir, you have Ariana from the Labyrinth monsters, you have both the Light and the Dark Purelli monsters, you have a lot of Dragon Link monsters. Just to give examples of archetypes and strategies that are already relevant in the format. This card can make it so you can tutor out 2 cards. So it essentially becomes like a fantastical Dragon Phantasme in a way, but not just for Link monsters, but for any monster that can search cards. Which is really, really strong. You're getting a body and 2 new cards out of it. So by that sheer merit alone, that makes this deck really good with non-engine cards. It makes it so like you start cycling advantage. So by default, you're going to play at least these 7. Let's talk about Turbulence. Turbulence is basically like the biggest boss monster of the deck. It's a 3k attacker that can special summon itself by banishing 2 names from your graveyard. Well, 2 Rescue Ace cards in general, I think. Yep. And it can set up to 4 your spell and traps, as I mentioned before. It has to be quick play spell or traps specifically, so you cannot set the headquarters. But yeah, like this is basically the backbone of the deck. This is basically what you always want to go for if you're playing this strategy. If you manage to resolve this effect, you're very, very ahead of your opponent. So by default, you're playing 2 of this card. So we're at 9 so far. Next, you have the Fire Engine. The Fire Engine is basically an extender. If your opponent summons a monster, you can special summon a lower level Rescue Ace, as already brought up before. The other detail that's really important with this card, and I also did not mention it, but it's also a detail with the Fire Attacker. These 2 specifically can special summon themselves from hand if you summon a Rescue Ace. So that makes the Fire Attacker really ideal to play, as well as the Fire Engine, because the Fire Engine is just a really big body you can just summon for free. It has 2500 attack, so it can run over stuff like Fenrir, for example. And like if your opponent just activates anything, well, summons rather. If your opponent summons anything, you just tutor out like your Hydrant. You can tutor out your Airlifter or your Monitor, for example, and then just start plussing out of their effects. Not many people play 3 of this card. I think for experimental purposes, I would start with 3, but you can make the debate of just playing 2 or 1. So we're at 10 cards at the moment. Actually 12. We're actually at 12. So there are 12 Rescue Ace cards here. Next, we're going to talk about the Fire Attacker, and we'll talk about the Monitor as well. This tutors a spell, as I mentioned. This tutors a trap. They both contribute themselves from the hand, same way you can with the Impulse, but instead of summoning from deck, this summons from hand, this summons from graveyard. So before the release of Duelist Nexus, both these cards were very mediocre. You could make the argument of Airlifter wanting to search these cards, the spell cards, but the spell cards were not cards that start your plays, unless you control the fire hydrant. And the traps, as strong as they are, like you are not maximizing the value into tutoring these cards when you already have a boss monster that can just tutor out 4 of them. So before Duelist Nexus, I would have said these cards were not playable. However, yeah, we are receiving 2 new cards in Duelist Nexus, and one of them is a very, very important spell card for the deck. So by that default, you're going to play 3 Airlifter. So right now we're at 15 Rescue Ace cards. I will talk about the spell and the trap very briefly. Basically, Emergency, it's a spell card that can tutor out a Rescue Ace monster from your deck, but if you do that, you're forced into tributing a monster either from your hand or field that is a Rescue Ace. It essentially makes this lifter turn into a 1-card starter. I won't go through the combo in this video. There are many other YouTubers that are already doing that, so feel free to check them out. One that I highly suggest, I'll put in the description, is called Shahed TCG. He has made a couple of Rescue Ace videos already, and he talks about like a lot of engines and requirements that you can play with that strategy. So right now we're currently at 15. We're at 15 monsters from the Rescue Ace team, and the 3 emergency spell, that's going to be 18. Now let's go into the individual other spell and traps. Rescue makes it so you can special from the grave, but if you control the fire hydrant, you can special from your opponent's grave instead, or as well. The alert makes it so you can recur from the graveyard a name, but if you control the fire hydrant, you can grab 1 from your deck, so it basically turns into Rhoda. The extinguish, basically what it does, it can destroy an opponent's monster, but if you control the fire hydrant, it makes it so whatever you destroy with this cannot activate its effect this turn. So that's really, really strong against like floating effects, like for example Tear Lament monsters, just to give an example. You have the Contain, which basically it negates a monster, but if you control the fire hydrant, it makes it so that monster that you negate cannot be used as material. So against decks like Purelli, for example, decks like Dragon Link, decks like the Lifetrain Runic Sprite deck, stuff like that, this card is really, really strong because it pretty much freezes them into place if you play it correctly. So by default, you're going to play these 4 just because you can tutor them out from your deck with the Turbulence. However, there is one other trap card, which is the Reinforce. Basically, it turns your monster into a towers, and it gives it 1500 extra attack. And the first time that monster would be destroyed, it is not. And not only that, but you can banish this from the graveyard and you can set one of your spell cards. So this is the least powerful trap card in the group, but it is another piece of utility. It is a card that boosts your monster's attack, so it makes it so you can start like applying pressure to your opponent. It also helps protect your monsters. So like for example, if you have the Turbulence and you want to make sure the Turbulence resolves, you can flip this. Or if your opponent tries to get rid of your board but cannot get rid of everything, you can do this to, like for example, protect the Hydrant or protect like other cards, and it makes it very problematic for your opponent. So yeah, you're going to play all these cards by default. and we're talking about 5 of them. So by default, you're playing 23 Rescue A spell and trap, cards at the moment. As I mentioned before, there's no real use for Monitor because you do have the Turbulence that can fulfill whatever you're trying to do with the Monitor, and just tributing to Reborn from Grave might sound good for the mid to late game, but this is a deck that is going to force the late game out of your opponent, and you do have another monster that is coming out in Duelist Nexus that pretty much will make it so this card is obsolete, because that monster can also tutor from banish, and it also has a disruption effect, and it's also a very big body. So you're not going to play the Monitor. Now we can talk about the Headquarters. What Headquarters does is that it gives you an extra summon for Rescue Ace monster. And not only that, but it can take up to 4 Rescue Ace cards that is in your graveyard or your banished, and cycle them back into your deck. Many people just play 1 copy of this. I personally like 2 of this. Opening this alongside the Hydrant basically means full combo. Not only that, but it also makes it so you can play other cards in your deck, like for example Dimension Shifter. It could be really good with this strategy, just because it makes it so this card makes it so whatever you lose in card advantage involving Shifter, it's fully mitigated and it's just non-existent waste. But yeah, I feel like this card is very, very important. Something really cool is if you play more than 1, you can use the effect of 1 to put another one back into the deck, and it basically becomes a resource loop between two copies of this. Like if you end up losing 1, you can just Airlifter, grab it, and then just use the first one, tutor back the second one. So basically it turns your resources almost infinite. So yeah, that's something important to take note if you're building this deck. Like, do you care about the grand game? Do you care about like recycling your cards? Do you care about like your resources? And like, if we go by that logic, then this card it could be warranted at playing on multiples, the Rescue, and the Headquarters can be warranted at playing on multiple copies. So as of the moment of me discussing this, we're at 26 Rescue Ace cards. That gives you 14 cards for non-engine. It could be even more if you're not playing the certain ratios that I'm playing. So what are cards that are important in this deck that you can play? Pot of Prosperity is a very obvious one. I don't have it on the at the moment, so just pretend that that's an option. Another important card that you can bring up is Small World. I think Small World is very, very cool because every Rescue Ace name can tutor itself into another name because of Small World. So that's really, really important. Another important detail is you do have room for hand traps. I think hand traps are going to be very, very important in this format because this is not the only deck that's getting support. Another deck that's also getting support that's going to be really, really strong is Vanadium. I might make a video on that separately very, very soon, but Vanadium is another deck you need to look out for. So it's really, really respectable. It's a really, really scary deck. It can do really unfair things. It can even contemplate on ending your opponent's turn. So yeah, I think hand traps are going to be very, very important. But other board breakers, like for example Super Polymerization, is another really good option. So I want to talk about Super Poly. Um, in the OCG, one Rescue Ace build that they're running is running Mud Dragon of the Swamp because of Proxy F Magician. I think if you're going to play a card like that in your extra deck, this card is a good fit because there's a lot of archetypes and a lot of strategies in the game that just can become a target for Mud Dragon. Another thing is you hardly use your extra deck when it comes to this strategy, so you do have a lot of room for cards that work along Super Poly. This deck is very similar to Labyrinth in that that regard. The last card I want to talk about, and this is a personal tech of mine. Not many, I don't think anybody has talked about this card in years. But if I were to play the Rika deck, I would have played that this card. If I play this deck, this card is also very nice. And trying to think of other strategies, well, those are the two main ones. But the card I'm talking about is a spell card called Trial and Tribulation. So what does this card do? So Trial and Tribulation is a normal spell card that reads, during the end phase of the turn this card was activated, apply this effect. Depending on the monsters tributed from the field and in your hand this turn, accept tokens. 1. You draw one card. 2. Add 2 monsters from your graveyard back to your hand. 3. Destroy up to 3 face-up cards on the field. So essentially what this card does is, with the inclusion of Emergency, which is the new spell card that's coming in Duelist Nexus, that will make it so this card can draw you one card. However, if you end up activating like Impulse, for example, like contesting against your opponent's effect, or the Airlifter to summon from your hand, or just activating like just tribute summoning for like your Turbulence or your air or your fire attacker, just to give some examples. This can make it so you can do the other bonus effects as well. But yeah, whenever I see a deck that has a tribute strategy, I immediately think about this card, because this is a card where your opponent does not know which effect you will end up resolving, and they might be inclined on stopping it in the off chance that you do generate a lot of advantage with this card. But yeah, that's pretty much it. I kind of just wanted to talk about Rescue Ace because the thing that happened with this deck is that the win condition already existed, but the biggest issue of this deck was consistency. And not only it lacked consistency, but it also lacked the room for like non-engine cards, because you were very reliant on some specific cards in your deck. This deck just felt very weak because you were wasting a lot of resources just to get to Turbulence to just set your spell and traps. But now with the support from Duelist Nexus, we're getting another new boss monster besides the Turbulence. You're getting easier ways to tutor out into card advantage. The combos are way more easier. It's pretty much a one card combo deck now. And you have multiple copies of those one card combos, or those one card starters. But yeah, stay tuned. It's still very soon to say what is the fate behind this deck, but right now a lot of people are excited for it. I think this deck could have a very good level of success depending on who's the pilot and how you end up building it. But yeah, that's pretty much it from me. Expect more videos involving this upcoming set very soon. Keep practicing and keep dueling.